249 years ago, a huge dimensional gate opened in the skies, and from the gate, demons descended. After arriving on the planet, the demons immediately declared that they were invading mankind. The scary demons started cutting down humans, and this marked the beginning of the invasion of demons. Realizing how serious the situation is, the Orthodox Alliance formed the unit known as the Orthodox Heaven Demon Extermination Corps. The created unit declared that they would be wiping out the demons, and 3 days after this, they ran into the demon troops in Manhwa. This doesn't end well for the humans, as they are all wiped out by the far superior demons. A year later, half of the people in the Central Plains were wiped out. Then the Orthodox and unorthodox martial artists worked together to form the last line of resistance in Sichuan. The battle was so intense that it lasted over half a month, but in the end, 90% of the resistance army was wiped out. This then leads to the annihilation of 90% of the Central Plains martial artists. The remaining survivors became slaves to the demon and were dragged to the demon realm. Among those who were dragged to the demon realm is our MC, Beong. 5 years after this, something shocking happens to our MC. Beong was unable to use his inner energy from birth, but when the demons worked on him during an excruciating experiment, he was classified as a rare species. After several experiments and brainwashing, Beong became a part of the demon realm's subjugation army. After this, decades passed with Beong being active in the demon army. Beong was involved in the invasion of other dimensions, and he carried out mass unalivings. Beong continued eliminating people, and 75 years later, he was recognized for his contributions, and he became a commander among the demons. 120 years after he became a commander, he finally found out about what happened to his own dimension. This made Beong mad, and for 50 years, he searched for ways to manifest a particular technique. 65 years later, Beong staged a rebellion. He had taken his time to prepare for the rebellion, but a week after the rebellion started, it ultimately failed, with Beong's soldiers all wiped out. Even Beong is beaten to a pulp as he stands in front of the Demon King, Tarant. The Demon King mocks Beong, saying that he is nothing but a disappointment. He tells Beong that he risked all of his contributions to the army just to stage a weak rebellion. Tarant calls Beong by his demonic name, Schwitz. But in his weakened state, Beong screams at the Demon King not to call him such. Tarant continues by telling Beong that he doesn't understand him. Tarant has spent a lot of time watching humans, and even though they are the weaker species, he admits that they possess a great trait, and that is their obsession with survival, regardless of the situation they have found themselves in. He considers this the only strength that humans have. Tarant then asks Beong why he decided to suddenly act recklessly after all these years. Beong replies that he did what he did so he could experience a battle with Tarant. He wanted to know how strong Tarant is so that the next time he fights him, he will be more prepared to defeat him. Tarant is surprised to hear this and admits that Beong's take is interesting. However, he believes that Beong is a fool. Tarant lets Beong know that he has no intentions of sparing him. He assures Beong that there is no way out for him. On the other hand, Beong is also confident that he will not die at the hands of Tarant. With the last of his strength, Beong activates the technique that he has been working on. This immediately opens a purple portal from the skies. The portal covers Beong, and Tarant immediately recognizes the power that our MC just used. Apparently, Beong used a technique called time regression. This is the authority of Noizerun, who is an ancient evil god. Tarant finally realizes that Beong endured defeat and humiliation for the past 200 years, just so he could get a good chance to use the technique. Before the portal takes effect, Beong arrogantly tells Tarant that he will be more prepared for their next encounter. He assures Tarant that he is going to beat the crap out of him and every single demon in existence. Tarant, who is covered in fire and has a scary appearance, laughs out loud when he hears this. Tarant then tells Beong that he will be looking forward to their battle together. Tarant admits that Beong is the only human he has ever acknowledged, and by this, he excitedly waits to see what Beong will bring to the fight when they meet next. The time regression portal finally activates and Beong is taken back in time. In the Central Plains, Beong crashes into a martial arts building. With the technique he used, he has gone back 10 years before the demons arrived. It turns out that the building he crashed into is one of the Orthodox Alliance Martial Arts Academy, which is the Dragon Spring Academy. Days later, the people in the academy believed that lightning was the cause of the damage to the roof. While they were repairing the roof, two guys talked about their disbelief that lightning had destroyed the roof. In addition to this, the lightning only struck the one person they consider to be a loser, and this is our MC. Beong is a vice instructor in the academy, and he was once an orphan who was brought to the academy by the physician Jin Beck. Everyone knows Beong as the trash, who can't use his inner energy. He is also the one who was struck by lightning, but the guys are disappointed that he didn't get injured that much. Surprisingly, that day is also considered to be his execution. And by execution, Beong is competing in a duel. This is a duel for the spear assistant position of the Dragon Spring Academy. People are gathered to watch the fight go down, but clearly, Beong is the underdog. Beong is the current spear assistant, but he is being challenged by an opponent who is recommended for the position, and his name is Maeng. Maeng is also known as the Invincible Divine Spear. Since a request came in to verify Beong's abilities, the duel is a good opportunity to determine who will be the assistant instructor. The two fighters are expected to fight with their honor and in their career as martial artists on the line. Once they are both standing in the ring, Maeng mocks Beong, telling him that he looks better than he expected. Maeng already thought Beong was not going to be present for the duel because he had heard that the guy had been struck by lightning. However, Maeng is impressed that Beong still showed up, and he promises to end things quickly. To make things easier for them both, Maeng even suggests that Beong surrender. Just then, Beong opens his mouth to tell Mang a story. He tells Mang that in the far future, there was an instructor of a certain martial arts academy who couldn't use inner energy. This wasn't the guy's fault because he was born with that trait, and this caused him to be looked down upon by others. In the end, the incompetent instructor, who was known as the shame of the martial arts academy, suffered a horrible defeat in a public duel. His position as an instructor was stolen, and he was left to do menial jobs. Beong narrates that the guy suffered so much. Mang is already confused, and he is forced to ask Beong what nonsense he is spewing. Unknown to Mang, Beong was telling him the story of his former self, who would have suffered defeat in his hands. However, things are different now, and Beong tells Mang that he has been waiting for this particular moment for a long time. Mang gets really mad when he hears this. He had plans to take things lightly with Beong, but since Beong can't keep his mouth shut, Mang plans to teach him a lesson he won't forget. Mang activates his martial arts skill called the Bull Demon Spear Art. Red aura swirls around him as he points his spear at Beong. Using the first form of his art known as the Ferocious Bull Charge, Mang goes after Beong. However, Mang is left in shock when he reaches Beong and feels nothing. Surprisingly, Beong has moved away before Mang can get to him, and he is now standing behind him like a cool boss. Beong reminds Mang that he needs to land a hit for his technique to work. Mang gets madder and swings his spear backwards, hoping to catch Beong, but Beong swiftly dodges. This shocks Mang as he cannot comprehend how Beong is able to dodge his attack. This is something he has trained for decades, and Beong easily dodges it. Mang heard that Beong was weak, but what he is facing is entirely different from what he expected. Beong adds salt to Mang's injury when he tells him that his technique is slow, and it is not worth teaching anyone. Mang still doesn't want to believe that Beong dodged his attack. He assumes that Beong only got lucky. Mang then repositions himself, ready to go after Beong again. He lifts off the ground so hard that the pressure from his flight cracks the ground where he was standing. Mang jumps toward Beong. With rage in his eyes, Mang activates the Bull Demon Spear Art 4th form, known as Falling Bull Strike. Beong remains unfazed even with Mang charging toward him. Beong then takes the moment to do some cool spear moves, but Mang mocks him, telling him that there is no way he can block his attack. In a shocking turn of events, Beong changes his stance and stretches his hand toward Mang. Just then, Beong released a fireball from his hand. Mang is left in shock and fear when he sees this, but there is no way for him to dodge the attack. Mang is hit with the fireball, throwing him to the ground like trash. Mang is engulfed in fire while the spectators are left in horror at what they have just witnessed. Mang screams out, and the overseer of the duel immediately concludes that the duel is over. Beong is then announced as the winner of the duel. Beong stands there with all pride as Mang screams in pain, begging for water to be poured on him. Beong then recounts how he was captured by the demons and dragged to the demon realm. Beong survived as much as he could for centuries, and in the process of that, he realized something very important. He learned that his Heat Yang arts, which is a high-level magic, is not quite different from regular martial arts. The physicians soon show up to carry a burnt Mang from the stage. Beong still finds a way to mock him as he is being carried away, telling him that they had a good fight. The spectators are left to wonder what type of power Beong is using. They have never seen a martial arts skill like that in the past. One of them heard Beong call the technique the Yang Finger Arts. The elders tell Beong that he won, but they wonder how he is able to use internal energy. Beong replies to the guys, telling them that it was a stroke of luck. Beong cooks up a story. He tells the elders that a few days ago, he ate some herb he had never seen before while he was on a walk. Because of this herb, Beong claims that he can now use internal energy. He's about to continue his story when the elders cut him off. They let him know that they are fully aware that he is spewing nonsense. Beong is not ready to convince them further, and he tells them that they have a choice to believe him or not. In addition to this, Beong doesn't think this matters. Beong points out the fact that he didn't cheat in the duel. It was a fight for the position of teaching spearmanship, but there was nowhere in the rules that stated that they were allowed to fight using only spears. Since this is the case, Beong doesn't see any reason why he should be interrogated. He won the fight fair and square, and this is just the basic truth. One of the elders is really mad with how Beong is talking to them, but he is told to calm down by his partner. The official then tells Beong that he is right, that he won the fight. Just as the man is about to pronounce him the vice instructor, Beong interrupts him, telling him that he has a request to make. Beong requests a test to be promoted to an official instructor, leaving everyone stunned. Beong's duel then makes him popular. He walks through the academy with the students staring at him. As for the Dragon Spring Academy, it is one of the many martial training halls set up by the Orthodox Alliance to prevent hardship in the Jianghu Marim. The purpose of the academy is to raise martial artists who will become pillars of the Orthodox Alliance in the future. The school takes in children between the ages of 15 and 18 from sects and clans that are at least decently big. The school instructors are composed of martial masters from the Orthodox Alliance. They are divided into assistant instructors and senior instructors. There are more assistant instructors than instructors, and this is all in a bid to properly teach the students. Later on, Beong is about to enter his room when he is stopped by the physician, Jinbaek. He asks Beong how he is able to suddenly use internal energy. He wants to know what Beong has gone ahead and done. Beong then replies that it is nothing but a stroke of luck, as he has said before. Jinbaek angrily speaks out, telling Beong that he is saying trash. Jinbaek reminds Beong that he has treated him for a long time. Since the time that Jinbaek learned that Beong couldn't use internal energy, he started doing everything in his power to fix him. But he failed. Jinbaek falls to his knees, crying while calling himself a failure. With tears in his eyes, Jinbaek says he remembered how others treated Beong because of his inability to use internal energy. Jinbek starts to apologize, and Beong smiles when he realizes that the old man hasn't changed at all. Apparently, Jinbek is like a father to Beong. 542 years ago, before he used the time spell, which is now 15 years ago now, Jinbek was the person who ran into flames to save him as a dying child during a bandit attack. Jinbek was also the one who lost his life while saving others when the demons attacked. However, this time around, Beong is determined to make sure that Jinbek doesn't die. Beong walks up to the crying old man and tells him that there is no need for him to blame himself. He also adds that the old man should quit worrying about him. Jinbek's face immediately changes from sad to curious as he hears Beong say those words. Beong begs Jinbek to trust him because he is going to resolve all of their problems henceforth. That night, Beong runs an assessment on himself while he is alone inside his room. He realizes that the time spell he used has caused him to lose 90% of his mana. The best magic he can use right now is the 4th circle, which is quite disappointing because he had previously reached the 8th circle, and this took him centuries to achieve. However, Beong comes to the realization that he needs to be grateful for the fact that he still has some mana left in him. Beong then remembers his time in the demon realm yet again while affirming the fact that he is back from hell, called the demon realm. He has been able to reverse the history of Jiangmurim to when the demons had not yet invaded. Even with this, Beong knows that the demons will still invade 10 years from now. If the demons invade, the realm will fall. But thankfully, Beong still has his 300 years worth of memories, and he plans to use this to alter everything. Beong still has information on the demon army, such as the kind of magic they use, the artifacts and weapons that they prepared for the invasion, and most importantly, he knows how to take down the demon king, Tarrant. Moments later, Jinbek comes into Beong's room. He tells Beong that the Vice Academy Master Cheon Samyoung is looking for him. Beong is surprised that they are looking for him so late in the night, and the fact that Jinbek was the one sent to deliver the message. Jinbek tells Beong that he doesn't mind, but lets him know that he is worried about him. Jinbek knows that Beong is being summoned because he requested a promotion. The man urges him to be careful because the test will be hard. In addition, Samyoung was the one who recommended Maeng. Since Beong was able to easily defeat Maeng, Jinbek knows that Samyoung probably hates him. Jinbek then asks Beong why he suddenly decided that he wants to be an official instructor. Beong replies that this is his first step to fixing the academy. Beong puts on his clothes and then heads to the office where he has been summoned. Apparently, the Dragon Spring Academy was once a renowned academy. It was considered to be the best out of the top 3 orthodox martial academies. However, 2 years ago, the academy's master, who is also one of the top 10 martial masters, suddenly disappeared. Because it was hard to replace the man, the academy searched for him for 2 years, but yielded no results. Due to the disappearance of this skilled master, the academy lost its fame. Beong finally arrives in the room where Samyoung and the other officials are waiting for him. Beong is asked if he is serious about his request for promotion, and Beong says yes with a big smile on his face. In reality, Beong hates Samyoung because he is the major cause of the academy's decline. Beong remembers the day of the demon's invasion. Great ruptures opened up from all sides, and monsters that had never been seen before emerged to start eliminating people. There were monsters left and right, with nowhere to escape to. Screams were heard all over, coupled with deaths. This gruesome day marked the beginning of the demon's invasion of the dimension. The young disciples of the Dragon Academy were all wiped out in the most ruthless of ways. That day, Beong saw Samyoung and Instructor Deong running away from the academy. Apparently, Samyoung hadn't run away, or if he had just reported the situation, or even activated the defense system in the academy, it would have prevented many deaths. While standing in that room, Beong can still remember the screams of the disciples who were unalived that day. Although this has not happened yet since Beong is now in the past, but Beong has no intention of forgetting Samyoung's ugly face. Since Beong is adamant about his promotion, Samyoung lets him know that there is a test that he needs to pass first. Samyoung tells Beong that he needs to raid the demonic knight stronghold. Beong is shocked when he hears this, and he is forced to ask again. The demonic stronghold is a bunch of bandits in the mountain close to the academy. Samyoung confirms this, and he tells Beong that he needs to terminate the bandits. In official terms, the demonic knight stronghold is a large group of bandits located in the old sacred mountain situated not far from the Dragon Spring Academy. Due to reports of frequent damage caused by the bandit group, there is an order to raid the bandits for the sake of the civilians. This is the order given to Beong by Samyoung, and it is signed in an official scroll. After reading the scroll, Beong is forced to ask Samyoung why he needs to terminate a bunch of bandits to become an instructor. Samyoung lets Beong know that the request concerns the most basic requirements to become an instructor, since senior instructors are the main force of the academy. Also sitting in the room is Deong, and he is the Blade Technique senior instructor. Basically, all the senior instructors in the school are considered martial masters. From Samyoung, who is a master of the lightning blade arts, to Deong, whose arts focus on the tyrannical tiger blade. There is also Yoon Byuk, who specializes in archery technique, and his art is the soul-chasing arrow. Sang Pilji is also an instructor, and his art is the Dark Shadow Divine Sword. All these people have been officially recognized by the Orthodox Alliance because they have accomplished great things, such as eliminating evil demonic martial artist leaders or taking down bandits. After hearing everything that Samyoung has to say, Beong asks him how long he has to complete his mission. This gets Deong mad as he considers Beong an arrogant kid, but Samyoung calms his partner down. Samyoung then tells Beong that he has 2 weeks to complete the mission and even a day's lateness will not be tolerated. Beong smiles when he hears this. He tells them that he doesn't need 2 weeks because he is going to complete the mission in 3 days. The level of confidence that Beong has shocks the instructors, especially Deong. After Beong leaves the room, Deong asks Samyoung if he truly has plans to promote Beong. However, Semyoung tells Beong that he shouldn't worry himself. He assures Beong that Beong will not be coming back alive. Beong gets curious when he hears this, and he asks Semyoung what his plans are. Meanwhile, Beong is already on his way to the mountain. He is using the magic spell Haste to move faster. Beong is not a fool, as he knows what Semyoung is planning for him. Beong remembers that it was around this time that the Forest Alliance began to rise in fame. Beong explains that people do not know much about them just yet. As of the moment, it is not something big. At the same time, Semyoung is explaining his plans to Daeyoung. He tells Daeyoung that the head of the alliance is a peak realm martial master. His name is Master Ah Gugyeom of the demonic Night Stronghold. Semyoung says Gugyeom is no ordinary bandit leader, and even the Orthodox know this. In truth, he was a former leader of an unorthodox sect called the Heaven Destroying Sect. He was betrayed, and people believed that he died in the hands of traitors a few years ago. However, he survived, and he later tracked down those who betrayed him, and he wiped them all out. Because of how cruel his revenge was, the unorthodox Murim put out a bounty for his head. Since then, Gugyeom has been hiding, but he recently came out, and he is in the area. After hearing all of these, Beong is shocked, and he asks Semyoung how he knew about what he just told him, but Semyoung dodges the question, regarding it as unimportant. Beong is still worried that Beong might make it back alive because he displayed something extraordinary during the duel. Semyoung assures Beong that what Beong is going to face is not a duel, but a real-life situation. And because of this, Semyoung is confident that Beong is not coming back. Meanwhile, Beong has reached the mountains. He admits that Gugyeom is not on his level at the moment, since his fourth circle magic will not be able to defeat him. However, Beong has something else in store for the problem. He plans to increase his mana before facing Gugyeom. After all, his experience and knowledge are already in the 8th circle. Beong then uses his search magic to locate something crucial to what he is planning. He makes his way to what seems like a regular cliff, but it is not. The cliff is nothing but a barrier made from mana. Beong smiles when he realizes that he is in the right place. And no one could have imagined that something of great importance was being hidden right there in the central plains. Beong steps into the barrier and enters what seems like a cave. Sitting in front of him is a shining object. The object is none other than a special grade mana stone. Apparently, the mana stone was carefully placed there by the demons. Since the demons know that they are going to invade one day with the use of interdimensional travel, they come to the realm and secretly plant equipment they will need in the future. The mana stone is the source of their power, and it also recovers the demon's mana. The stone is basically useless to humans, but thankfully, Beong is not on a human level again. Beong touches the stone to absorb the energy from it, and this releases an energy explosion that shoots out of the cave. That night, Gugyeom and his men are seen searching the mountain. After searching for some time, one of his men tells him that there is nothing on the mountain, but Gugyeom tells him to shut up and search thoroughly. Apparently, because of how skilled and experienced Gugyeom is, he was able to feel the energy explosion from when Beong used the mana stone. Just then, Beong appears behind him, sitting on a rock unconcerned. Beong then commends Gugyeom's intuition, telling him that he believes in him. Gugyeom is disgusted by Beong's presence, and he asks him who he is. Beong uses the moment to aura farm as he unleashes a magic circle in his hand before telling Gugyeom that he is an instructor of the Dragon Spring Academy. Gugyeom's subordinates do not believe Beong, but as they argue among themselves, their boss tells them to shut up. Gugyeom then turns his attention to Beong, asking him if he is the cause of the great energy explosion, and Beong answers sarcastically. Gugyeom gets angry and tries to slash Beong with his sword, but Beong easily dodges the attack. Gugyeom's attack leaves a red explosion, and he believes that he has landed a hit on Beong. He boastfully says he is there to terminate, but he is shocked when he hears Beong's voice behind him. Beong unleashes a mana and attacks Gugyeom with it. Beong luckily reacts to the strike, but the same cannot be said for Gugyeom's boys, as they all lose their heads from the attack. This leaves only Gugyeom alive, and he opens his mouth in horror as he watches Beong decimate his entire team. Without fear in his eyes or voice, Beong tells Gugyeom that he is also in the mountains to kill him, which means their objectives align with each other. The two lunge at each other with Beong urging Gugyeom to avenge his subordinates. Gugyeom only gets madder with this, and he asks Beong who he is. The fight between the two gets more intense as Beong's purple aura clashes with that of Gugyeom's red aura. Several sword clashes and explosions are the highlights of the fight as Beong reminds Gugyeom that he is an instructor at the academy. Gugyeom refuses to believe this as he struggles to land a hit on Beong, but Beong is too swift. Gugyeom soon notices that Beong is not even struggling against him, and this frustrates him. Gugyeom finally loses it, and he taps into his ultimate power. A burst of red aura fills the area, causing a shockwave that even pushes Beong backwards. The name of Gugyeom's ultimate attack is Heaven Destroying Hegemon Divine Arts. Gugyeom then releases all of his core to maximize his power, and his eyes turn bright red. Gugyeom tells Beong that he has made a big mistake by forcing him to use his ultimate skill. He starts explaining the origin of the power. It all started when he was thrown off the cliff by the traitors, and while dreaming of revenge, he collected a bunch of innate core energy. Beong then shocks the guy by shutting him up, letting him know that no one cares about his story. The insult from this shocks Gugyeom. Beong makes it clear that he doesn't care about the story of some useless villain. Just then, Gugyeom notices an ice path that leads straight to his body, keeping him in place. This turns out to be one of Beong's techniques called the freezing wave. Gugyeom is still in shock about this when Beong gets closer to him and hits him with another technique called astral chain. Two portals open on the sides, and from them emerge chains that tie Gugyeom's arms, restricting his movement. He shouts in frustration and tries to break free from the chains, but Beong tells him not to stress himself. He lets him know that the moment the chains touched him, he had already lost. Apparently, the astral chain sucks away the victim's internal energy. It is basically a spell designed to take down martial artists. Realizing that he has nowhere to go, Gugyom asks Beong where he learned sorcery of this type. He even asks Beong if he is from the demonic cult. However, Beong replies that it is not sorcery but magic. Beong still insults Gugyom, calling him a bandit idiot for not knowing the difference between magic and sorcery. Frustration and defeat set in, and Gugyom regrets the fact that he is about to die on the mountains. Beong asks him if he has regrets, and Gugyom reveals that the only regret is the fact that he is not able to get his revenge. He wanted to terminate those who manipulated his subordinates when he was still in the heaven-destroying sect. To get his revenge is why he started working with Semyong. This was also the reason he was on the mountains to recover his power. After saying all of these, Beong claps for him, not showing any form of sympathy for Gugom's cause. Beong laughs at Gugom but admits that he is determined, and he took his revenge pattern the right way. Gugom cannot believe that Beong is mocking him, and he scolds Beong for this. He tells Beong that he cannot understand his pain since he grew up so comfortably. Beong hears this and loses this. He cannot believe that Gugom just told him that he lived a comfortable life. With his eyes glowing, Beong draws closer to Gugom. Gugom sees this and realizes that he has messed up. The expression of shock on his face says it all as he concludes that Beong is not an ordinary man. In fact, he believes that something is mentally wrong with Beong. Just then, Beong decides that he is going to make Gugom feel what he felt during his 200 years of suffering. Looking like a scary villain, Beong places his hand on Gugom's head so that he can get a glimpse of his suffering. Gugom's consciousness is then transported into the demon realm so he can see what Beong experienced. The first place he landed was the wastelands. He starts to wonder what is going on or what Beong has done to him. He is still in the middle of this when a giant and scary monster appears right above him. Fear grips, but just after, he is taken to the battlefield where he sees countless humans slaughtered. As if this is not enough, he finds himself in the room where the demons conducted experiments on humans. By this time, Gugyom is already losing his mind, and he finally loses it when he is taken to the Demon King's presence. Gugyom finally returns to his body, but he is not himself again. He screams out in horror at everything he has seen in just a short space of time. Beong stands tall above him, asking him how he felt about what he saw. Beong lets him know that this is what he is going to experience in 10 years. Gugyom immediately grabs Beong, begging him to kill him because he can't handle it. The feared Gugyom is so broken that tears run down his eyes like a kid. Beong understands his pain and suffering and agrees to relieve him of his pain. Beong raises his sword and cuts off Gugyom's head without hesitation. Beong then returns to the academy with Gugyom's head and his sword. He presents them to Semyong, who cannot believe his eyes. Beong tells Semyong that he knew that Semyong might not believe him if he brought only his sword, which is why he added his head to the collection. Without hesitation, Beong tells Semyong that the discussion on his promotion to a senior instructor should be the next thing. The following morning, Semyong holds a meeting with other senior instructors. Senior instructor Yo Woojin, who uses the fist technique, cannot believe that Beong took down Gugyom. He reminds his colleague that Beong was the shame of the academy until just a few days ago. Eunbyuk then asks Deong if it is true that Beong raided the demonic knight stronghold all by himself. Deong confirms this and tells his colleagues that he went to the mountains himself. He says he found the bodies of the bandits exactly where Beong told him he was going to find them. Deong admits that he has no idea how Beong did it, but he noticed that the other bodies, except Gugyom's, had their throats sliced with just one attack. This creates more confusion among the group because Beong is known to be a spear instructor. They wonder if Beong is hiding his sword techniques too, but they just cannot come to the conclusion that this is possible. When Deong realizes that his colleagues won't believe him, he tells them that they are free to go to the mountains and confirm things. Semyong realizes that things are getting out of hand, and he urges his colleagues to calm down. Even to Semyong, the entire scenario doesn't make sense because he knew how powerful Gugyom is. He is fully aware that Gugyom is a peak realm martial master, and he was able to confirm this by himself when he was relaying a message from the Orthodox Alliance to Gugyom. With how strong Gugyom is, Semyong wonders how Beong was able to kill him in just one night. Even Semyong admits that he himself is not capable of such a feat. Thinking about all the factors that might be involved, the thought of Jinbaek helping Beong crosses his mind, but he quickly kills the thought. With what he knows, Jinbaek is not that skilled. The only conclusion that Semyong can come to is the fact that he needs to look more into Beong. Semyong then asks Deong if he can get in touch with the Ghost Shadow Manor. Apparently, the Ghost Shadow Manor is one of the biggest assassin organizations in the martial world. The group is known for doing anything as long as they are paid the right amount. Semyong then tells Deong to put in a request to find out everything that they can about Beong. Semyong even wants to know what Beong does on a daily basis. After this, the discussion of whether they are going to promote Beong comes up. However, one of them already has a solution to this. He has compiled a shabby list of disciples who are going to be under Beong's mentorship. They all laugh when they see the list, and they commend their colleague for coming up with such a brilliant idea. They believe that Beong is going to quit, even before the Ghost Manor is able to do their thing. They are very sure that this is going to be the outcome since Beong has little experience. When asked what Beong did when he saw the list, Deong says he only smiled. Unknown to the old idiots, everything is going according to Beong's plan. Beong regressed to this time and place for a reason. After he learned about Nozarin's power of time regression, Beong thought to himself what he needed to do to prepare for the demon's invasion. Since the enemy is an army that has already conquered countless dimensions, and he is just one person, there are limits to what he can do. In the end, Beong came to the conclusion that the best thing he could do was to raise an army. Beong is not looking to raise weaklings like the ones who died before his regression. However, he has plans to raise a powerful army that has learned all kinds of magic and martial arts. Beong soon stands in front of the students who have been allocated to him. These are guys who have been marked as troublemakers among the first-year disciples. Beong believes that the students are talented, but their personalities have been getting in the way. In addition to this, some of them are neglected because they don't come from prestigious families. It is normal for Simyoung and his bunch of clans to think Beong will not be able to handle them, but they don't know something quite important. There were two heroes who did their best during the demon's invasion. One was a martial master who reached the evolutionary realm in his late 20s. He was the last hope of Murim, who led the alliance against the demons, and he is the Heavenly Sword Alliance leader. The second person was a talented archer who led a squad specialized in assassination and patrolling. By himself, he terminated most demons, and he was the demon-slaying divine archer. Unknown to Samyoung and his group, those two overpowered guys are among the students they have assigned to Beong. With a big smile, Beong welcomes his students, introducing himself as their instructor. Earlier that day, Gok Bork of the 1st Camellia class, second son of the Dragon Tiger Escort Agency, is seen giving training to another student, Dan Le-young. Dan Le-young is also a first-year student, and he is the eldest son of the One-Star Sword clan. Dan tells Gok to give him a break because he has almost broken all the bones in his body, but Gok is not ready to back off. He screams at Dan, telling him to get up because anyone who sees them will assume he is being bullied. Gok tells Dan that he should be grateful that he is showing a weakling like him his Dragon Tiger Mountain splitting fist arts. Dan tries telling Gok that they only take swordsmanship classes in his clan. Gok laughs when he hears this, and he tells Dan that the skills he learned are useless because he couldn't use them against him. Dan gets mad when he hears this, and he clenches his fist as if he is preparing a big attack. Gok sees this and mocks Dan, telling him to stop clenching his fists. He threatens to beat him up again if he doesn't do as told. Realizing that he has no chance against Gok, Dan unclenches his fist before he gets beaten up again. Just then, one other classmate, Yepen Wookyoung, enters the room and urges Gok to stop forcing Dan to train with him. Yeon Wookyoung is also a first-year student whose art is the destructive sword. He is the second son of the Yeon clan. Surprisingly, Gok listens to Yeon, and he backs off, telling Dan that he is lucky. Looking dejected, Dan thanks Yeon for coming to his rescue. They are in the middle of this when one of the teachers enters to tell them that they will not be in the Camellia class anymore. Apparently they are being transferred to a newly created class. The trio is shocked to hear this, but are more shocked when Beong appears in front of them to introduce himself as their new instructor. The cadets looked at Beong in a scornful way as they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Gok is the first to talk as he tells Beong to stop messing around. He can't believe that they have had to move classes on short notice, but they will also be receiving instructions from an incompetent teacher. Gok continues ranting until Beong speaks up, telling him that his choice of words is quite bad. He reminds Gok that he is an instructor, but Gok doesn't care about this. Gok tells Beong that he doesn't care about whatever strings he had to pull to become an instructor, but he has no plans to learn under him. Beong realizes that Gok is not ready to stop talking. Beong decides to resort to the use of the Academy rules, which are under Article 3, Clause 5. Before Gok knows what is happening, Beong uses the magic spell, Blink, to reach him. This shocks Gok, and before he can do anything, Beong steps on his foot, causing him pain. Gok screams out in pain as Beong does this. Gok goes down on his knees, and Beong quotes the Academy rules that give instructors the go-ahead to punish students if they show bad behavior. Instead of backing down, Gok clenches his teeth in anger. He pulls together a powerful punch to try and hit Beong. Gok is so mad that he even pulls out his ultimate skill, the Dragon Tiger Mountain splitting fists, just so he can punish Beong for embarrassing him. However, Beong effortlessly dodges all of Gok's punches while reciting the school rules for him. Beong is too fast for Gok to track, and before the big guy knows what is happening, Beong throws a punch into his chest. The pressure from the punch changes Gok's entire body system, as he looks like someone who just saw a horror movie. Beong tells Gok that his martial arts are very weak as he continues raining down punches on the big guy. Gok falls to the ground after a barrage of punches has hit him, but Beong is not done just yet. He tells Gok to stand up and try to fight him again. Meanwhile, Dan is watching from behind, and he is absolutely blown away. He doesn't believe that Gok, who is ranked as the top among the new students during external arts training, is having his ass handed to him. Dan concludes that it is bad enough for Gok to be losing as if he were a newbie. Not ready to give up, Gok tries to stand up from where he is, but Beong meets him halfway with his knee. Beong's knee crashes into Gok's face, unleashing a new form of pain for the guy. The rest of the cadets are horrified by what they are looking at, but none of them can move. And now, Gok is now scared as he has realized that there is nothing he can do to counter Beong. He crawls backward as Beong moves closer to him. Beong says he is not pleased with the way his first class has started, but he doesn't mind punishing his students since it is the role of the instructor. Beong then prepares to punch Gok in the face. Gok looks at the powerful punch coming at him and he is absolutely terrified. However, Yeon intervenes in the fight and grabs Beong's hand before he gets to punch Gok. Yeon tells Beong that he is already too hard on Gok, who is just a cadet. Beong lets off a weird smile when he realizes that Yeon has finally decided to make a move. The reason why he is excited is the fact that Yeon was the powerful Heavenly Sword Alliance leader before the regression. Before the regression, Yeon was a member of one of the prestigious clans in the Central Plains. From a young age, he was recognized within the clan as a martial arts genius. Even among the new students of the Dragon Spring Academy, Yeon displayed overwhelming skill. His talent was far beyond what the Dragon Academy could even contain. At the mere age of 20, he achieved the feat of becoming the youngest in history to become a supreme peak martial master. He was also ranked among the top 10 martial masters of the Orthodox Alliance. Originally, Yon was supposed to live a brilliant life, but the demons came. From the early stages of the demon invasion, he participated in more battles than anyone else. But not long after this, his clan became the target of concentrated attacks from the demons, and the clan was wiped out. All members of the clan were wiped out, except for him. After this, Yon didn't collapse into despair or depression like others. Yon picked himself up and traveled across the Central Plains, fighting countless battles against demons. He gathered survivors and formed an allied force that transcended both Orthodox and unorthodox sects. Even in such a hopeless situation where everything was against him and his army, he led the remaining martial artists in a desperate final resistance. Beong still remembered how powerful and glorious Yon was. Yon always charged to the front lines of the battlefield, and whenever he unleashed his dazzling sword energy, even massive demonic beasts that seemed to be the greatest were all taken down in an instant. Without a doubt, Yon was considered the hero and final hope of the Central Plains. However, now, he is just another noble brat who is from a prestigious clan. Beong pushes his hands off, and Yon admits that what Beong is doing is quite amusing. When Beong asks him what he means by this, Yon reveals that he is surprised that an assistant instructor who couldn't use internal energy until recently has suddenly gotten strong. Yon knows that this is unexpected, but he is not thrilled with the fact that Beong is using his newly acquired power to show off in front of cadets. Yon considers this nothing but pathetic. Even Gok is looking all bloodied and ashamed. Yon then asks Beong if he suddenly got strong due to one of those so-called fated encounters. Beong is surprised that Yon can even have an idea of what that means. Yon understands that Yon is curious to know, and he promises to tell him if he obediently follows his training from that moment. Shockingly, Yon says he is not interested. Yon complains that he doesn't know what kind of trick Beong pulled to change the class rosters, but he plans to submit a formal complaint to the academy. Yon turns around to leave after telling Beong that he has no interest in learning from someone who is filled with arrogance after hitting a lucky stroke of fortune. As Yon walks away, some of the talented students, including Gok, follow Yon. Just then, Beong does something interesting. He tells Yon that he is wrong for running his mouth like he is special. In addition to this, Yon is acting almighty, believing that he has nothing to learn from him. Yon then places his hands on Dan's shoulders. He tells Yon that he is going to train Dan, and in just 10 days Dan will be able to defeat Yon. Dan hears this and sweat drips down his face. Yon also hears this and turns back to look at Beong. He demands that the guy repeat himself, and Beong doesn't hesitate. He boasts in front of everyone that in just 1 week of training, the weakest among them, Dan, is going to be able to take down Yon in a fight. Dan cannot believe what he is hearing, and before he gets the chance to protest, Beong covers his mouth. Yon then asks Beong if he is willing to take responsibility for what he just said, and he says yes. Beong then makes it a bet. He tells Yon that if Dan is able to defeat him in under just 10 days of his training, Yon will follow his training without objections. However, if Yon wins, he is free to ask him to do anything. Beong assures Yon that even if he tells him to leave the school, he will. Yon laughs when he hears this, and he tells Beong that he wants nothing from him. However, he wants Beong to be prepared for the match, and after saying this, Yon walks away. Beong finally lets Dan go, and he screams out in horror. Dan is already seeing himself as dead meat, and he asks Beong why he did what he did. Beong tells Dan to calm down, and he will explain to him, but Dan is already erratic. He continues complaining and refuses to let Beong go until Beong gets mad and slaps him across the face. Dan falls face down, and Beong tells the rest of the students that class is over for the day. He lets them know that the schedule of the next class will be sent to them individually the next day. The students walk away, wondering just what is happening. Meanwhile, Dan is still on the floor, thinking about what Beong has gotten him into. Beong reminds Dan that all he has to do is win. However, Dan recounts how his first public spar went. In his first spar after he enrolled in the school, the first person he went up against was Gok, and he was brutally defeated. After this, Gok tormented him every day. However, this same Gok, who is considered to be a monster, went up against Yon and was utterly defeated. Gok was so badly beaten that he couldn't even land a single hit. Beong admits the fact that Yon is strong because his martial arts talent alone is truly one of a kind. Since Beong knows how proficient Yon is, Dan asks Beong why he still had to set him up. Beong then tells Dan that he has nothing to worry about. He assures Dan that he is stronger than Yon, but he just doesn't know it yet. Apparently, before the regression, he was the demon-slaying divine archer. Dan still doesn't know why he has to challenge Yon in a spar. Beong tries explaining to him that it is simple. He has to fight and defeat Yon to help prove his abilities as a teacher. However, Dan is not thrilled with this explanation as he believes that this is Beong's problem and not his own. Dan doesn't have any idea what he stands to earn from helping Beong prove that he is not a trash teacher. Beong then lets him know that he stands to earn a chance to get his revenge. Since Gok has always been beating Dan, Beong asks Dan how he felt when he was beating him up earlier. He asks Dan if he felt fulfilled or satisfied with this, or if he wanted to get revenge all by himself. Beong then tells Dan something interesting. Since Gok, whom he considered to be strong, cannot touch a hair on Yon's head, Beong lets Dan know that he can train him to get stronger than Yon. With this, Dan can finally have what it takes to even bully Gok himself. After hearing all of these, Dan agrees that it will be nice for him to get stronger. However, Dan is not aiming to become stronger because he wants to defeat Gok. What Dan wants is just to get stronger than his current self. Beong is glad that Dan has come to this resolution. The next day, Beong puts Dan up for his first training session. Dan has a dummy to spar with while Beong monitors from the roof. Beong tells Dan to go after the dummy so he can know his skill level. Beong urges Dan to see the dummy as Yeon so he can be extra motivated. Beong urges Dan to wield his martial arts to the fullest. Dan does as told, and he starts slashing the dummy repeatedly. Dan does this for some moment, but just when he is about to slow down, Beong screams at him to keep going. Dan tries to impress Beong by putting in his best, but he loses his balance and falls to the ground. He coughs out in exhaustion while sweat drips down his face. Beong then comes over to where he is. He asks him if he knows what his problem is. Dan replies to the question by explaining what he thinks might be wrong with him. He explains that while carrying out basic moves, for some reason, his internal energy keeps dispersing. Initially, Dan thought he had learned his clan's martial arts incorrectly, so he tried to confirm this several times. However, he found out that there were no problems with his basic moves. After this, Dan believes that he has an issue with his Dantian or Meridian points, so he had it checked out not once but several times. However, even this yielded no results. With all of these, Dan has come to the conclusion that he lacks talent. Beong then tells him that he is wrong. Beong reveals something that Dan never thought of before. He tells him that his Meridian points spread further than others. Dan is shocked when he hears this, and he asks Beong to explain further. Beong repeats that Dan was born with his Meridian points more spread out in his mind than most people. On a regular day, this is considered to be a rare constitution that has more advantages than disadvantages. However, since Dan is still young and he lacks the internal energy, Beong lets him know that all martial artists must discharge their internal energy created in their Dantians through their Meridian points. However, Dan has wider meridians compared to others and a little amount of internal energy, which is why his internal energy's power doesn't focus properly. In addition to this is why his internal energy keeps dispersing. Dan is shocked to hear this, as this is the first time he has heard something like this. Beong doesn't blame him because he only heard it by chance before the regression. Staring at Beong, Dan starts to feel something different in the air. He believes that there is something more to Beong than he is letting off. Beong then mentions that he will end the explanation there. Since they now know what the problem is, the next step is to fix it. Dan is even more shocked when he hears that there is a way to fix his problem. Beong assures him that there is a solution, and in fact, it is a simple one. Beong says that compared to other people, Dan lacks power because of his wide meridian points, which means he can resolve this by increasing the amount of internal energy that he has. Dan takes his stance again and stares at the dummy more seriously this time around. Beong tells him that since they can't increase his internal energy in such a short period of time, he will teach him only one method that he can use. Beong says Dan should keep gathering internal energy, which he will keep right until he starts his basic moves. And once he has gathered enough, he is free to unleash his power. Dan follows every bit of Beong's instructions, and for the first time, Dan locks in. He dashes toward the dummy, and in a surprising moment, he cuts down the dummy pretty easily. With Beong's method, Dan is able to display his true power for the first time. Dan cannot believe his eyes as he looks up with excitement. Beong is also proud that he is able to make progress with Dan. Dan excitedly turns to Beong, telling him how good he feels. Beong assures the guy that he saw everything, but urges him to relax before he collapses. Dan laughs when he hears this because this is the first time in his life that he has felt so energetic. He hasn't finished the statement when he collapses to the ground. When Dan finally regains consciousness, he tells Beong that he suddenly collapsed, but Beong clearly saw him pass out. Beong then asks him how he feels, and Dan confesses that he has no strength left in his body. Beong then tells Dan that what he is feeling is just a minor side effect from him channeling his full power for the first time. Since Dan has never used his meridians too well in the past, his body couldn't adapt in such a short time, which resulted in him passing out. Beong mentions that Dan has nothing to worry about because the side effects will naturally go away after a few months. Dan hears this and heaves a sigh of relief until he properly processes what Beong told him. He is shocked to hear that the side effects might last months when he has a duel coming up in a week. When he finally gathers the strength to resume training, Beong tells Dan that he is suffering from two problems. Beong explains that whenever Dan unleashes his technique with his stored energy, all the inner energy he has gathered up until that moment will be consumed with just a single strike. Because his body cannot withstand the blowback, Dan faints. Adding to the problem is the fact that Dan's energy core is also too small for him to store energy ahead of time, and he can't even sustain it for long. And if Dan tries to force himself to do that, he wouldn't just collapse, he would risk going into energy deviation, which is totally forbidden. After the explanation, Beong asks Dan if he understands, and he says yes. However, Dan is worried about the staff that Beong is holding in his hand. Beong then continues his explanation. He tells Dan not to mind the small stuff and instead he should think about it. Beong lets Dan know that he can actually start storing up energy after the duel begins. He asks Dan how long it took him to gather his energy when he took down the dummy, and Dan says 7 minutes. Beong is not impressed with this because he doesn't see Dan holding out against Yeon for 7 minutes. Beong then reveals that there is only one solution to the problem, and Dan dodges like hell until he has successfully gathered his energy. Dan finally realizes why Beong has staff with him. Beong comes after Dan with the aim of hitting, but he manages to dodge the attack. Beong doesn't stop, and he comes after Dan again. He tells him to forget about the attack and just focus his attention on gathering energy. Beong makes it hard by using the illusion spell to make himself appear more than once. Dan fails to dodge this time, and he gets smacked in the head. This hurts Dan, but Beong tells him to stop whining because he didn't even use any inner energy against him. He then urges the boy to stand up so that they can continue training. Dan is beat up, forcing him to talk trash about Beong's training method. Beong then gets serious with him. Beong asks Dan if he thinks he is bullying him. Beong continues by telling Dan that his problem has already been identified, which means the next step is a solution. Beong gets brutally honest with Dan when he tells him that he has no chance of touching Yeon if he doesn't improve himself within the space of 1 week. Beong admits that the training is painful and hard, but he considers this the only way Dan is going to have a chance to prove himself to others. Beong's words are able to reach Dan, and this is enough to motivate him. He gets off the ground, apologizes to Beong, and tells him to continue the dodge training with him. He assures Beong that he can endure a whole day of the training if that is what is going to take for him to be better. This is just something that Dan said to Beong out of excitement, but deep down, he is scared that he doesn't have what it takes. Beong is happy to see that Dan's motivation has returned. Beong rearranges his shoulder while telling Dan that he will have to endure the training non-stop for the entire week. Before Dan even knows what is happening, Beong charges toward him, leaving Dan in tears. A week later, it is time for the duel. Yeon and Dan step into the ring to battle while other students and teachers are present to witness it. Yeon looks cool and confident, while Dan has bruises all over his body, but he has the aura of a changed man. Most of the students do not believe in Dan. They are confident that Yeon is going to blitz him early in the match. Some believe that Dan might hold out because they saw him practicing but getting smacked around by Beong the entire week. Even Gok is in the stands, and as expected, he doesn't think Dan has a chance. He says Dan should have just stayed quiet in a corner rather than causing them problems. In his thoughts, Gok is mocking Dan for believing Beong's words. Gok is confident that Yeon will trash him really hard. Before the duel begins, Yeon tells Beong that he has changed his mind. Previously, he said he didn't want anything if he won, but now he wants something. Beong tells him to proceed with his request, and Yeon lets Beong know that he would like him to leave the academy if he wins. As expected, Beong accepts the deal and also reminds Yeon that if he loses, he will have to follow his instructions to the letter. Beong then tells Yeon to focus on Dan and not him. Talking about Dan, he looks totally different from his usual self. Beong then reads out the rules. He tells them that victory will be determined when one side either forfeits, loses consciousness, or drops their weapon. In addition to this, any lethal or life-threatening strikes are forbidden. Since Beong is the judge, he tells them that he will be the one to make the final call. Once everyone is in agreement, Beong starts the match between Dan and Yeon. Just as the fight begins, Dan suddenly feels his arm torn off. This shocks him as he doesn't see Yeon move from where he is. He then hears Yeon telling him to surrender. It turns out that what Dan just felt is Yeon's murderous intent and not Dan's actual presence. Dan realizes that Yeon could have torn him apart if he really wanted, but the guy wants him to surrender without getting hurt. This gets into Dan's head, and he starts to shake. He doubts himself, wondering what pushed him to take on the strongest guy in his class. To make things worse, Dan realizes that he only has a week of training. Dan looks around and spots Beong staring at him. With the way Beong is looking at him, Dan gets the feeling that he is going to get whooped if he loses the fight against Yeon. Dan then reminds himself of the real reason he started the fight. He remembers that he wanted to become stronger than he currently is. This was his vow a week ago, and now, he is ready to uphold it. Yeon notices that Dan is not ready to back down, and he calls him an idiot, telling him that he already gave him a chance to leave without getting hurt, but he didn't take it. Yeon then lunges at Dan with a very powerful strike, but to everyone's surprise, and even Yeon's, Dan is able to react just in time to block the attack. The pressure from the strike pushes Dan back, and he realizes that things could have gotten worse than he anticipated. The chi he collected prior to the attack almost got dispersed. Not ready to play around with Dan, Yeon activates one of his scary techniques, the Berserk Dragon's Rage Torrent. Even Dan sees this and knows that he is in trouble. Yeon comes at him with a swing, but he manages to dodge it yet again. Even though he dodged it, Dan can feel just how powerful the chi from the attack is. Yeon takes another swing, but Dan dodges yet again. Dan starts getting confident with the belief that he might actually have what it takes to dodge Yeon's attack. Everyone watching is shocked at what they are witnessing inside the ring. Even Yeon now realizes that Dan's 1 week of training isn't a waste. Yeon then uses another technique, the Twin Dragon Fang Severance. This makes Yeon's appearance look as if he has become two. He comes at Dan, but to Dan, he just remembers when Beong used the illusion spell to split himself. He realizes that Beong has already prepared him for the occasion. Thanks to his training with Beong, he is able to dodge Yeon's attack yet again. He leaps above Yeon and lands behind him with sweat dripping all over his body. Yeon is not ready to give Dan a break, as he comes after Dan immediately. Dan dodges the attack, but Yeon just keeps coming. This scares Dan as he realizes how fast Yeon is. He is not only fast, but he is also precise. However, Dan realizes that he is going against one of the best swordsmen in the Central Plains, and he is not supposed to expect any less. Even with this conclusion inside his head, Dan still pushes himself forward, telling himself that he has what it takes to dodge Yeon's attacks too. Dan figures out that the sword technique that Yeon is currently using to hunt him down is the same one that Beong has been using against him the entire week during training. Since he is already familiar with every move, every sudden change and pace, Dan continues to dodge. At some point, Yeon is forced to back away after failing to register even a single hit. The students refuse to believe their eyes when they see Yeon backing away from Dan. Argument ensues among the students as they try to figure out what is currently happening in the duel ring. Some assume that Yeon is acting, but others dispute this because the Yeon they know will never consent to acting out a duel match. Meanwhile, Yeon is at the edge of the ring, trying to figure out what is happening. He grabs his sword tightly again and suddenly tells Dan that he is sorry for calling him an idiot. This shocks Dan, but Yeon continues. Yeon admits that Dan has learned a lot within the last week. Yeon says he doesn't know how Dan figured out the Supreme Heaven Severing Sword, and he starts to prepare another attack. Dan's face lights up in shock when he sees what Yon is doing. Yon spins his sword, and suddenly, a blue wave surrounds him, making him look really dangerous. The new technique Yon just used is the Fierce Dragon Annihilation technique, and he tells Dan that he is going to admit defeat if he manages to dodge this technique too. The wave buildup from the sword technique gets so high that it starts to scare the people who are even watching from the stands. They have never seen a sword technique like that before, leaving them to wonder what sort of strange technique it is. In a surprising and shocking turn of events, everyone watches as Dan walks toward the blue tornado. All of them keep asking themselves where Dan is going, but Dan just continues toward Yon as if he has lost all sense of fear of him. The night before the duel, Dan looks totally battered and weak. Beong then commends him for his training so far, telling him that he has been dodging so well, which means their mission might actually be possible. Excitedly, Dan asks Beong if everything he has learned will allow him to dodge all Yon's attacks, but Beong says no. This shocks Dan, but Beong explains that Yon is no fool. He explains to him that to that point Yon would be underestimating him, but if he continuously dodges his sword strikes, he will have no choice but to set up countermeasures. Beong then mentions that Yon would have no choice but to use his greatest technique if Dan manages to make it to the end. Beong then shows Dan what the technique looks like. He explains that the technique makes it seem like a fierce dragon is materialized, and it is a martial art that creates massive sword chi. Beong then shocks Dan when he lets him know that he has no chance of dodging the attack. Beong mentions that it is quite pointless to try to jump or move back in an attempt to dodge the attack. Beong explains that the attack will just grow instantaneously and swallow the entire stadium. Dan is left stunned after hearing all of these, and he considers the sword technique practically unbeatable. However, Beong tells him that he is wrong. Beong confidently says there is nothing unbeatable in the world. He continues by explaining that the technique, which is a storm of chi, might look perfect, but it is not. Generally, the Fierce Dragon Annihilation technique is a martial art designed to annihilate the majority of the enemies who get scared by its incredible force or even try to run away. Beong lets off a wicked smile when telling Dan that there is only one way out of the situation, and this is if Dan keeps moving forward. And during the fight, this is what Dan does. Even though all odds seemed against him, he stepped into the storm. Even though he got cut a little, he continued moving toward Yon. Beong had already prepared Dan for every possible outcome. He already told Dan that Yon would immediately react to the fact that his technique has been exposed. However, Beong lets Dan know that in that position, Yon is vulnerable. He tells Dan to take his moment and use his stored-up anger and land a blow. Dan follows everything Beong told him, and with this, he hits Yon before he can react, thus destroying his sword. Yon can only watch in surprise as his sword is scattered into pieces right in front of him. Yon is defeated, and after the battle, Beong supports Dan by holding him. While everyone is cheering for him, Beong asks him how he feels. While everyone is celebrating, there are some who are really mad, and one of them is Gok. He probably doesn't believe that Dan just won the battle. Beong asks Dan if he feels excited, and in a moment of joy, Dan says yes. Later on, Beong enters his classroom to attend to his students. Since they had a deal, Yon and the others who rebelled had no choice but to be in the class and take Beong as their teacher. While Dan is smiling, Yon is frowning, probably still in disbelief that he lost. Beong smiles at the class, and with this, he announces the start of their first class. After Beong has successfully secured his students' trust, an argument broke out between Semyoung and his circle of clowns. Semyoung cannot believe that things have turned out the opposite of how they want them. The whole point of their mission was to make sure that Beong voluntarily leaves the academy. However, things are not going their way, and the cadets are following him instead. The two notable students who are with him are Dan Yon. Even though they tried to convince them, the two students remained adamant that they wanted to continue studying under Beong. One of the group members suggests that they switch their classes again, but it seems Yon has threatened to withdraw from the academy if they do this, and this is not something they want since it is going to destroy the academy's reputation. The guys are now regretting their decision to let a genius like Yon learn under Beong, who is nothing but a rookie. The rest of the team wastes no time pinning the blame on Semyoung. He is the leader of the faction after all. Semyoung then asks if it is true that Yon lost to Dan. They tell him that Yon conceded defeat, but from reports, it is certain that Yon lost. Semyoung cannot believe that the prodigy from the Yon clan lost to Dan. This only adds to the mystery that surrounds Beong. Semyoung then comes to the conclusion that they cannot leave Beong unchecked. Just then, it dawns on him that they actually submitted a request to the Ghost Shadow Manor and they haven't heard from them. Semyoung is mad about not getting a response from the organization, and he angrily calls them a bunch of mercenaries who act high and mighty. Suddenly, Semyoung hears a voice telling him to be careful with his choice of words. Everyone in the room is thrown into panic as they wonder who is talking to them. Semyoung demands to know who is there, but the voice tells him that he is asking a foolish question. Unknown to him, there is a scary ninja behind him. Semyoung cannot believe that even with the level of his experience in the martial arts world, he couldn't sense the presence of the person talking to him. Just then, the ninjas finally reveal their presence, and they turn out to be from the Ghost Shadow Manor. With a commanding tone, the ninja leader, Ghost Shadow 1, demands to know more about the target, Beong. He is then given a portrait of Beong to give him an idea of who the target is. After they leave the room, Shadow 1 holds a meeting with his subordinates, Shadow 5 and Shadow 7. They are surprised that Semyoung and his guys are willing to pay a huge sum to conduct an investigation on one of their own. This makes the situation ironic because the academy is always acting all virtuous to outsiders. Shadow 5 then speaks out of turn, saying they are not so different from the corrupt guys because they also scavenge on dirty funds. Shadow 1 gets angry and reminds Shadow 5 of what their mission is. Apparently, they have sworn to do whatever dirty tasks they can until they find a certain someone and serve him. Shadow 5 apologizes for speaking out of turn, and his boss lets it go. He then tells him to focus on the mission. The question to investigate Jin Beck comes up, but Shadow 1 tells his guy to focus on the target, Jin Beck, in the meantime. Shadow 7 asks his boss if he believes the myth that Beong had a fated encounter, but Shadow 1 tells his subordinates not to believe such a rumor. Shadow 7 finds it hard to let the stuff go. He mentions that Beong could not use inner energy until recently, but suddenly he became a martial arts master. He believes that there is something hidden behind the scenes. Just then, the thought of Beong having secret and powerful backers came up. They assume that Samyung and his circle already know this, which is why they hired them to investigate. Shadow 1 suggests that Beong might be dangerous than they actually think, and he urges his guys not to allow anyone to catch a trace of them. Shadow 7 boastfully reminds his boss that no matter how strong Beong is, there's no way he can detect the stealth techniques of the Ghost Shadow Manor. With this confidence in mind, the ninjas begin their task. Later on, Jin Beck and Beong are seen discussing outside. Jin Beck mentions that Beong's name is already spreading through the school. Jin Beck is worried about Beong, telling him that there are people who have started making moves against him. Beong understands this and tells Jin Beck that jealousy and envy always follow the path heroes walk, so he has nothing to worry about. Jin Beck mentions how glad he is that Beong actually had a fated encounter because things have changed for him. Jin Beck says things would have been bad if Beong had lost the duel against Mayang, since Samyung was trying his best to get rid of him. Upon hearing this, Beong recounts what happened before the regression. He actually lost the fight against Mayang. He was then stripped of his position as assistant instructor and demoted to menial labor. Unable to cope with the shame and embarrassment, Beong ran away from the academy. Beong wandered around with no purpose until he ended up becoming an escort warrior in an escort agency. Even though Beong still lacked the knowledge to use inner energy, he poured his blood and sweat into training his physical techniques and spear fighting. After surviving numerous dangerous escort missions and attacks from bandits, Beong eventually became a first-ranked escort warrior. Beong then spends his next 10 years as an escort warrior. He traveled the entirety of the Central Plains, gathering a network of contacts and information in the process. Then one day, Beong decided to stop at the Dragon Spring Academy for old time's sake. But this day was when the demons decided to attack. Remembering all of these, Beong angrily picks up a stone and throws it forward. Jin Beck is shocked to see this, and he asks him why he suddenly threw a rock. Beong claims that he saw an ugly frog and just couldn't help it. Jin Beck scolds him for trying to harm a harmless frog, but he reminds the old man that he used to catch frogs and feed them to him as medicine when he was younger. With this, Jin Beck couldn't defend himself. In a surprising revelation, it turns out that Shadow 7 and Shadow 5 are hiding exactly where Beong threw the rock. The rock hit Shadow 7 in the face, causing it to swell up. 7 wonders if Beong actually saw through their stealth, but 5 assures that it was just a stroke of luck. 5 tells 7 not to doubt the Ghost Shadow Manor's cultivation techniques over something that can be considered irrelevant. 7 agrees with 5, and the guy urges him to believe in himself. Since Beong is already heading back to his quarters, the only thing they can do is to continue to surveil him. While in his quarters, Beong comes to the conclusion that the first objective is now complete. He starts thinking about bringing another character who seems to be a girl. He wonders if it is the right time to bring her in yet. He is in the middle of this thought when Yeon enters the room. Yeon is surprised to see Beong facing the door as if he was already expecting him. Beong replies that he is aware that Yeon would already be restless, so in a way, he was already expecting to see him. Yeon can only wonder what sort of arrogant and disgusting expression Beong has on his face. Beong then asks Yeon why he has come to see him. After some moments of hesitation, Yeon finally talks. He mentions his duel with Dan and points out the fact that Dan was able to read all of his moves. Initially, Yeon took it as a result of Dan's training, but later realizes that it can't be. He realized that the movements were not just responses to his moves. It was as if Dan knew everything about his movement and the pathways of his technique. Yeon then asks Beong if he was the one who taught Dan everything about his clan's sword technique. Yeon is also surprised that an outsider like Beong knows about the destructive sword techniques that the Yeon clan uses. Beong replies in a sarcastic manner, telling Yeon that his clan's technique is powerful and famous. This means anyone could have gotten wind of it, but Yeon is too smart to buy this. He tells Beong that knowledge is not readily available for just anyone to acquire. Yeon berates Beong for taking him for a fool, and Beong commends him for not falling for his tricks. Beong lets him know that he would have been disappointed if he did. Beong then tells Yeon to be more honest with himself if he wants to become his disciple. Beong is aware that Yeon is not only curious about how he knows the techniques of his clan. He confidently tells Yeon that he is aware that he also wants to know the flaws of the Supreme Dragon Heaven-Severing Sword technique. The technique was perfected years ago and has been passed down through the clan as a unique swordsmanship. This is why the swordsmanship is currently praised as the greatest sword art in the Zhongyuan. However, Beong knows that Yeon noticed something while wielding the technique as he grew up. Thanks to his wisdom, Yeon was able to figure out that the technique is not actually impossible to beat since it has its flaws. Since he is the heir to the clan, he couldn't acknowledge this fact. When Yeon hears all of these, he tries to act tough by telling Beong not to look down on his clan's martial arts. However, Beong tells him not to deceive himself, and he lets him know that in the near future, everything that seemed like it mattered, like status and the like, will not mean anything. Beong then urges Yeon that the only thing he should be concerned about now is how he is going to get stronger than he currently is. Beong encourages Yeon to push anything that might be a hindrance to the side and focus on getting stronger. After saying this, Beong tells Yeon that he will only discuss more details with him when he is finally ready. For now, Beong urges him to follow his instincts. Just then, Beong picks up his wooden pillow, and Yeon asks him why he suddenly grabbed it. Beong just tells the guy not to worry, claiming that it is not something important. Beong then throws the pillow out of the window, saying there is an annoying frog outside. Later on, the three ninjas, using the cover of the dark, are spying on the compound from a distance. They are keeping an eye on Jinbaek, since he is the closest to Beong. With the information that they have gathered, Jinbaek is a normal medic who worked in Gamsu. But 5 years ago, he became a physician in the academy. Jinbaek is a capable medic, but there is nothing that shows that he has properly learned martial arts. Aside from this, there is nothing else that they know about the guy. Shadow 1 sees Jinbaek as a regular person, but at the same time, he suspects that there is something more to know about him. Just then, Shadow 1 notices Shadow 7's disfigured face, and he asks him about it. Apparently, Beong has been throwing things at him all day, leaving his face completely swollen. Shadow 1 asks subordinates if they were discovered, but 5 says no. After all, Beong didn't react toward them. 7, on the other hand, believes that Beong has discovered them. Shadow 1 angrily berates 7 for doubting his clan's technique, and he attributes everything that has been happening to luck. He urges 7 to endure a bit longer since he has experienced things far worse than this. With tears in his eyes, 7 concurs with his boss's comment. To prevent a repeat of what has been happening, the ninjas move into the garden. 7 threatens to terminate Beong if something comes flying his way again. His boss assures him that he will be fine, but 7, who has suffered the entire day, remains doubtful. He says Beong might wake up and just start throwing things again. Suddenly they hear someone coming close to the garden and they quickly hide. It turns out to be Beong, and just as expected, he does something crazy again. Beong stands near the garden and says he needs to take a leak. He complains that he must have drunk too much tea. Shadow 7 is already shaking where he is. He doesn't want to believe that he is about to be the recipient of something awful yet again. After all, he is not the only ninja in the garden. Right there in front of them, Beong starts to take a leak on Shadow 7's head. 7 can no longer take it, and he jumps out of the garden screaming at Beong to ask him what his problem is. Surprisingly, Beong wasn't even taking a leak. He had deceived them into believing that he was relieving himself. He was pouring out liquid from a teapot, but 7 had already blown his cover before he realized this. To make things more annoying, Beong asks 7 if he wants to take a drink with him. This is when 7 confirms that Beong has known about them all along, but he was messing around with them. Out of anger, Shadow 7 unsheathes his ninja blades and charges at Beong in an attempt to unalive him. Beong stands there unfazed and uses barrier magic to block the attack. The barrier breaks Shadow 7's blades and Beong grabs him by the head. Before 7 can realize what's happening, Beong smashes him into the ground as if crushing a bug. With an evil smile on his face, Beong welcomes 7 and his group of Ghost Shadow Manner, implying that he is aware of their existence. Shadow 5 stands up in shock as he sees his subordinate lying on the ground. Beong angrily tells 7 that this is what he gets for poking his nose into other people's business. As if he hasn't done anything to upset the ninjas, Beong smiles and calls them his friends. Shadow 5 is absolutely mad, and just as he is about to go after Beong, Shadow 1 stops him. Shadow 1 himself then appears behind Beong, offering his greetings to the instructor. Shadow 1 lets Beong know that he is impressed that he has already discovered them. Beong smiles and replies that he is the one and only Beong whom they are searching for. Beong then concludes that Shadow 1 is the leader of the frogs, and by this he means the weaklings calling themselves ninjas. Beong then asks Shadow 1 if it is actually wise for him to reveal his identity to a stranger, but Shadow 1 angrily replies that he has no intentions of letting Beong live. Beong laughs when he hears this, and he asks 1 if he is not at all curious about how he found out about them. Shadow 1 is not ready to sit down for a conversation. Instead, he wants to start by cutting Beong up. He charges toward Beong with his sword, but our MC is unfazed by the impending danger. He arms himself with his mana blade and blocks the incoming attack. This breaks Shadow 1's blade, but he arms himself with another and goes after Beong again. The fight becomes even more intense, forcing Beong to admit a bitter truth. Beong notices that even though Shadow 1 lacks the destructive power that Gugyom possesses, 1 is faster, precise, and swift. In addition to this, all of Shadow 1's attacks are aimed at vital points. Beong also figures out that the density of energy embedded in Shadow 1's blade is quite high. Beong knows that there is no way his barrier is going to hold out against Shadow 1's attacks. Beong is also worried that he can't continue parrying Shadow 1's attacks using the mana blade. Even though Shadow 1 is quite deadly, Beong is thrilled to be fighting someone quite tough. As the fight continues, Beong is able to push Shadow 1 back with his mana blade, leaving Shadow 5 shocked. Shadow 1 then speaks out of his mind. He noticed that the techniques that Beong is using are quite different from the regular martial arts techniques. Shadow 1 doesn't want to believe that Beong just stumbled upon such an incredible power. He then asks Beong if he is using demonic arts. Beong denies this and asks Shadow 1 if he's ever personally witnessed demonic arts. In addition to this, Beong says it has been decades since the demonic cult fell, so he should forget about the idea of him using demonic arts. However, Beong admits that the technique is quite different from the regular martial arts techniques. When Shadow 1 hears this, he comes to the conclusion that Beong is not someone that they can subdue, which means they have no choice but to send him to the afterlife. With this, Shadow 1 activates his ultimate skill, claiming that whatever he does is for the sake of the Shadow Ghost Manor. Shadow 1 disappears from where he is, leaving Beong shocked. It turns out that Shadow 1 is using the technique called Soul Destroying Stride. Beong recognizes it as an elusive movement technique that, after erasing the user's presence, throws the target into a state of total confusion. The technique also relies on speed, and in that moment of confusion, the target gets hit before even realizing it. This happens just as Beong thought, but Shadow 1 manages to reach him and cuts off his arm using the Ghost Soul Slash. Before Shadow 1 can celebrate that he got the better of Beong, he realizes that he has been fooled. Apparently, Shadow 1 hit an illusion and not the real Beong. Before Shadow 1 can react to this mess, Beong has already gotten the better of him. Beong lands a powerful punch to Shadow 1's head to send him flying. Shadow 1 hits the wall, removing his mask from his face. Even Shadow 5 is shocked to see his boss getting punched around. While still feeling the pain from the attack, Shadow 1 asks Beong how he was able to track him. Beong knows that the ninjas take pride in their stealth skills, but little do they know that he can clearly see them, all thanks to his search magic. The search magic works like a heat-seeking machine, giving Beong the ability to see anyone, even if they are using stealth, just like the ninjas. Since he has taken down Shadow 1 and shown him that he is not on his level, Beong suggests that they have a civil conversation, as he had earlier suggested. Shadow 1 has no choice at this point but to hear what Beong has to say. Beong then starts to talk about the Ghost Manor, which is formerly known as the Origin Sect. This sect was a mysterious sect like a ghost. They never once appeared in any official events, and it is not clear whether they are orthodox or unorthodox. Their true goals and aims are kept a total secret. They were so well hidden in secret that when the sect was wiped out decades ago, most of the region didn't hear about it. It was only those who were born and raised in the Origin Sect, loyal to the end, who knew the actual truth. It was those who survived the attack that emerged under a new name, the Ghost Shadow Manor. The ninjas of the Ghost Shadow Manor now go around the region, gathering information, and in the end, they turned out to be a secret organization that carries out dirty tasks and dangerous assignments. However, all of these are for the sole purpose of one thing, and this is the restoration of the Origin Sect. Basically, this is their primary mission and what they care about. Shadow 1 is absolutely shocked as he hears Beong reveal everything that makes up their organization. He doesn't want to believe that someone who is an outsider knows about the organization's history. There has never been a time in history when the information about the Origin Sect has been leaked. Beong then goes straight to the point. He tells Shadow 1 that he has 2 missions for him. He tells Shadow 1 that if he completes the 2 missions, he will give him information on that thing that he has been searching for. Shadow 1 clenches his fist in frustration as he reveals that he has been searching for clues for 20 years but has found none. He then screams at Beong, asking him if he knows what the organization is searching for. With a calm voice, Beong replies that the organization is searching for the blood of the Origin Sect. Beong then specifies that they are looking for a unique bloodline that can fully inherit the sect's martial arts. These sets of people always have a distinctive birthmark on their left wrist. Shadow 1 calms down when he realizes that Beong knows what he is talking about and not just spewing nonsense. This is the core of the sect's restoration and the very reason they have been wandering for so long. Shadow 1 is surprised that Beong knows this because even within the Ghost Shadow Manor, only a select few should be aware of this secret. Shadow 1 asks Beong how he knows, but he refuses to answer, telling him that he will only answer once he has accepted his request. Beong tells Shadow 1 that he is also free not to accept and he can continue wasting his life tailing people. Realizing this fact, Shadow 1 stands on his feet, grabs his sword, and politely accepts the mission. However, Shadow 1 promises to fight Beong with everything he has if he later finds out that he is deceiving them. Beong doesn't worry himself about this, but he is glad that Shadow 1 has accepted his request, and he proceeds to give him his first mission. Elsewhere, a deadly assassin lady is seen taking out a bunch of thugs. She single-handedly wipes them out but leaves their vice leader for last. The vice leader, Manhwa, and his gang are accused of raiding a village and forcefully taking advantage of the women. It was the women who survived the attack that sent the lady assassin to take out Mac. She sits on Mac, restricting him from moving, and the guy wonders how he is not able to move his body or gather his inner energy. In fact, his internal energy is fading away really fast. In a desperate attempt, Mac reminds the assassin that he is the vice leader of the deadly gang. The lady assassin doesn't care about this, and she finishes off the guy by pushing her sword into him. After she is done unaliving the bad guy, she stands near the window, and this is when a messenger bird shows up. The assassin lady has been given her next target, and it turns out to be Beong. Moving on to Beong and his students. Beong is personally monitoring Dan's training. He leads him on how to move and the right position to stay. Beong notices that Dan is giving him attitude, and just as usual, he prepares to hit him. However, Dan begs him to stop, asking him why he is not beating Yon. Dan points to Yon, who is having his own personal training session. Yon is just standing there without doing anything, and Dan questions this. Beong reminds Dan that Yon is not on his level, and when he tries to argue, Beong angrily beats him since this is the only thing he responds to. Beong walks away but glances at Yon from the corner of his eye. He is impressed that Yon is doing so well on his own. He urges him not to be bound by the original sword techniques of the Supreme Dragon Heaven Severing. He wants Yon to go to the swordsmanship that his senses are guiding him to. Beong knows that Yon's talent is going to help him reach a higher level. Just then, Dan shows up again. Beong asks him if he has completed his chi circulation, but Dan says no. He has come to talk to Beong because he is worried. He doesn't know if he can really circulate his chi if he does as Beong ordered him to. Beong then tells Dan that he has no choice. He lets him know that the only way out of his problem is for him to accumulate enough internal energy. Beong then asks Dan if he is gathering elixirs as an alternative, but he says no. Since this is not the case, Beong tells him that the only way for him is to keep circulating his chi. Dan then agrees to do what Beong says, and dejectedly walks away. Beong understands why Dan is feeling insecure. He knows that Dan will not be proud of how he beat Yeon because it was mainly tricks. However, Beong knows that it is not something that can be dealt with in a hurry. Beong then meets with Shadow 1 to ask him about the progress of the mission. Shadow 1 reveals that it has been 10 days with no progress. Beong is worried because this might affect his plan. Just then, Beong shows up. Since Beong is not in a good mood, he gives Beong a very disgusting look that is hard to miss. Beong questions Beong on this, and Beong tells him that he is disturbing him since he is busy with his class. Beong doesn't think Beong is busy because he's just walking around. Beong wishes he could take on Beong, but what he saw in the mountains that day let him know that he is no match for Beong. Beong then tells him to go to the main hall because Semyoung wants to see him. Beong honors the summons and makes his way to the hall. Semyoung is already waiting for him, and he asks Beong how he has been faring. With a smile, Beong mentions that he has been enjoying life with his talented students. Semyoung is not happy with the way things are going for Beong, but there is nothing he can do about it. Semyoung then tells Beong about one of the requirements of the academy. Since the academy is under the Orthodox Alliance, Semyoung says the alliance is doubtful of Beong's proficiency. Apparently, the alliance has taken a keen interest in Beong. Beong is surprised that the alliance is after a nobody like him. Just then, a beautiful girl enters the room. It turns out the girl is an inspector sent by the alliance to evaluate Beong. The girl introduces herself as Mei Solan, but the presence of Mei in the room trips something off in Beong's head. However, he lies that he was captivated by her beauty. Semyoung then explains that Mei is a rising female master within the Orthodox Alliance. He adds that the lady is incredible and she reached the peak realm at a very young age. Semyoung urges Beong not to do anything that will destroy his relationship with Mei. Beong laughs at this and assures Semyoung that he will be a good boy, but something about Mei seems off to Beong as he stares at her with a suspicious look. In a flashback, we get to see the mission that Beong gave Shadow 1. He asked him if he knew the soul-taking celestial maiden, who is an assassin, and Shadow 1 said yes. Shadow 1 says the lady is a contract assassin who works by herself with no affiliates or comrades. The soul-taking maiden is known to never miss a target she's being given. Shadow 1 claimed that he had never met her, but her targets were always found with life sucked out of them. In addition to this, it is said that she is quite beautiful. Shadow 1 asks if his mission is to kill the assassin, but Beong says no. In fact, he wants Shadow 1 to call the assassin to the academy. This shocked Shadow 1, but while he is still processing this, Beong tells him to cancel his deal with Semyoung and lies that something came up. Shadow 1 does as told and cancels the deal he has with Semyoung. He even promises to pay the commission fee. He then tells Semyoung that he will introduce him to someone who can actually do the job, and this is when he tells Semyoung about the deadly assassin lady. After that, Shadow 1 asks Beong why he would do something so reckless since the assassin lady is said not to miss her mark. She normally finds a way to terminate her target no matter how strong they are. Shadow 1 says he is worried about Beong since he needs information from him and it would be bad if he dies. Beong admits that the deadly assassin lady is quite dangerous, but this is also why he needs her. Apparently, Mei is the deadly lady, and this is why Beong is acting funny around her.